Hello, and welcome to the Washington Farm Bureau Update, a podcast designed to provide the latest agriculture, legislative, and Farm Bureau information. As always, thanks for joining us. I'm Ben Tyndall. Today, we've got a roundtable of our usual suspects joining me, Tom Davis and Bree Elsey, our government relations team, along with Bailey Peters, who handles the Farm Bureau public relations. Gang, before we really dive in to the legislative update and hearing what bills you're looking at, I wanted to step back a second and ask you, maybe this is Washington Legislature 101, but we've been hearing really over the past couple of weeks about these upcoming cutoffs. We had policy cutoff, fiscal cutoff. This past week, we had our House of Origin cutoff. What are these cutoffs? Educate me here. What are these cutoffs? What's the value of having these deadlines or these cutoffs for our legislature?
The reason why they're the cutoff dates is really to kill bills. You start out with so many bills. Some ways you have to find a way to funnel those down to a handful, manageable number of bills, and deadlines help that process work. So you're always fighting to meet a deadline. That's the whole process.
So kind of playing with that a little bit, what does that mean when you're talking about the whole process is designed to kill bills? What's the value of a process? You have a great idea. Let's put it in a process and we want to try and kill it. Why?
Well, look at all the steps that a bill has to go through. It has to be introduced, then it has to go through a committee, then sometimes it has to go through a fiscal committee, then a floor, then it has to go through a policy committee, then another fiscal committee, then another floor. There's all these steps in which you can kill a bill, and it's designed so that you can step in at any one of those points and point out the flaws of that bill.
Now, I hear everyone throwing around this phrase that bills are dead, but is a bill actually ever really dead?
Aha! A bill is never truly dead until sine die. And sine die is when the hammer comes down, the gavel comes down at the very last of session. So at that point, session's over, so all bills that haven't passed are dead. But there are a lot of creative ways and a lot of smart people that can find ways to keep bills alive. And that includes either resurrecting them in some way or getting them amended onto another bill, getting them attached to the budget. So then they become what's known as a necessary to implement the budget bill, an NTIB bill. So if you get your bill attached to the budget, then and all that means is it's mentioned in the budget, then you exist outside the other deadlines. And so that's a nice place to be if you got a bill that you're trying to get passed.
So it sounds kind of like, yes, it is intended to kill bills, but in a lot of ways it's intended to refine bills to by the end, by sine die, ideally at least, you've kind of got the cream of the crop a little bit, depending on what perspective, I guess, an individual may have on that particular bill.
Or to use Tom's language, make it less bad.
Yeah. This year especially. And to be really honest, the process that the Senate has been using has been less robust than what we see in the House this year, that they're letting bills out that aren't fully cooked yet.
You're saying the Senate is letting bills out?
We've seen that more the last couple of years. A case in point would be that the carbon farming bill, Senate Bill 5947, there was very little work done on the original bill as it was dropped. There was problems with the language, but the Senate actually has voted it off the floor twice without making substantive changes. So sometimes that just becomes a policy statement. What the other thing is, so you can get through all of these cutoffs, the deadlines, and then get caught in a traffic jam, like trying to drive through Seattle, and you get someplace late because you're in a traffic jam. The same thing happens to bills that are trying to get off the floor and over to the other chamber, and we saw that happen on Wednesday. There were, I didn't count, Bree, but I mean, it looked like there were 100 bills on the floor in the House, and you get into a bill that there's a lot of amendments, a lot of floor speeches, takes up lots of time. Bills start dying just because of that.
I think we saw that on the gun magazine bill.
Yeah.
I believe it had 130 amendments sitting on the bar. So then there's a lot of deliberations that take place. Do we have the time to deal with all of these amendments and still get this bill passed, plus the rest of our run list? And that really does cause pause on a lot of these bills.
Bree, you mentioned earlier this week that cutoff was at 5 o'clock. And so all of those amendments, what does that play into that 5 o'clock deadline cutoff?
Oh, well, they can definitely open a bill at 4:59 knowing full well that it has 130 amendments. So although you might see a cutoff at 5 o'clock, that definitely doesn't mean they're done at 5 o'clock, because they can open that up at 4:59 and then proceed to run every one of those amendments after. So as long as it's open, it's fair game.
I've seen bills that what they call them, the 459 bills, that were introduced at 4:59, and the cutoff date comes and goes, but the majority party has power to do what they want at cutoffs. And seeing one of those bills run till like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, because it was a huge policy bill and with lots of amendments. So the 5 o'clock deadline is a pretty soft deadline if that's what the majority party wants it to be.
Well, now that we've passed these cutoffs, what are you seeing as far as bills that are at least technically still alive? What are you watching?
Well, last week I kind of want to report on some success we had before cutoff happened, and that's with Senate Bill 6261, the anti-retaliation bill that you've heard me speak about several times. And the most damaging part of that bill was Section 2 that said if any employee ever made a complaint, whether the employer really knew about it or not, if that employer didn't rehire that employee, the new legal presumption would be that the employer acted in retaliation. And this, of course, could set agriculture up for significant amount of lawsuits, and it was just a terrible bill all around. After a lot of negotiation, there was an amendment dropped that completely removed that section. So although you'll see that bill move forward post-cutoff, it'll be in a much more amended fashion, very palatable. Farm Bureau can be very neutral, comfortably neutral on this bill at this point.
Tom?
You see the cutoffs come and go, and some bills die, and you rejoice for yet a moment, and that's usually all the time you have. So in this case, I'm thinking of there were a number of gun bills out there, and there were a couple that dealt with magazine size, 10 rounds, 15 rounds. Neither of those bills passed off the floor, and in both cases, it was because of amendments piled on them, and majority party decided they didn't want to take 3 hours to do one bill. They'd rather do 15 bills rather than just those. So you rejoice for a moment that your gun rights are safe, and then we find out today that they've now dropped another bill that is a 15-round max. So that issue is not dead. And so we'll have to continue to watch that. So there's always this gamemanship that's going on within the legislature. You can never let your guard down. And that's just another example of that.
And post-cutoff, we're going to start seeing things go into a feverish pace. You're talking about a large, kind of an extended week's worth of committee time. And so now that these are out of their house of origin and on to the next chamber, they don't have very much time to start to look over these bills that were passed over to them. So we're going to start seeing things get hot really fast. And next week, I'm calling it kind of dirty pool, because I've already seen some hearings that do not add up, that don't look right. So we've got the House Bill 2322 is going to be a transportation appropriations bill, and that on its face is not very sensational. But if you look down on the agenda, it says that the hearing will actually be on a proposed substitute, but the proposed substitute hasn't been released. But don't worry, it'll be released 3.5 hours before the hearing starts. And for some reason, the legislature can't understand why the public at large absolutely loathes them. And it's things like this, where they're so comfortable in themselves that they can be openly anti-transparency and not even care.
Yes, sadly, that's not good government when they're making huge policy decisions and giving the public, like you say, a couple of hours ahead of time to review it and try to figure out what the impacts would be to, and in our case, what's the impact to the state's farmers. And so that's always a challenge. Low carbon fuel standard is one of those that we're watching.
And that's set for an executive session, but no public hearing.
Yeah.
So the government has told you that they're going to pass this bill, but hasn't even scheduled it for a hearing for the public to come testify on it. So what do you do with that? So right now it's an unanswered question. We don't know if that's a mistake. We don't know if they're just transferring it to another committee. So how do you prepare for a hearing that may or may not happen?
So how can our members prepare? Are we supposed to be ready for these hearings? And what do you want our members to do?
So that's actually a great question, really, because we don't know when the hearings are going to be, but we need people to be there. So that makes it hard. So I would say, just watch your emails. As soon as we know, we'll let our members know. And we'll also be calling some folks, asking them to come testify. And low carbon fuel standards would definitely be an example of one of those where we're hearing from our counterparts that represent other industries that say, the work that Bree did to bring these people in to testify, made a big difference in those hearings. So I think it's, so please, watch your emails, not only our legislator that's going to come out Friday, but over the weekend or Monday at the latest, if there's an urgent call to action, that's how we'll communicate with you. And also by phone, I think, to a handful of folks.
I would also say, and correct me if I'm wrong, if members are interested in a specific bill or if they have passion about one of the bills that we are watching, should they contact you and Bree and let you know that that's of interest to them?
Yes, I definitely keep a list going of any Farm Bureau member that's expressed interest in a certain topic, has emailed me on it, has come to testify on it, who's made calls for me on it, and I keep those lists. And if anything changes in that bill, I email that group and let them know of all the changes.
One bill that I would highlight is the Chlorpyrifos bill, the ban that came out of the Senate. It's in the House Ag Committee right now. And behind the scenes, there's kind of a tug of war to either move that bill to a different committee, because right now it's in the House Ag Committee, and for us, that's a favorable place for it to be. Move it maybe to the Senate Environment, the Health Committee. So committees that may not be as favorable to the needs and interests of agriculture, or just what ends up happening that bill. Will we be able to amend it in the House and get some of the, what we see as harsh language that's in the bill as it came out of the Senate? So we will need people to come testify on that. And again, so that's Friday the 28th, and I think it's a morning hearing. Again, look in the legislator, and for other emails that come out, we'll give you more detailed information about that.
In December, we had the legislative days, and you both shared some incredible information about what you're expecting this session. Now that we're kind of at the halfway mark, or I guess a little beyond that now, what are your expectations, or maybe what should the Farm Bureau members have that's kind of an overall feel as you're moving into, have your expectations changed? Have there been some surprises, maybe some good ones, some not so good ones? What are your feelings right now?
I spent a lot of time during those meetings talking about carbon policy. Really wanted our Farm Bureau members to know the difference between each carbon policy and how it might come into play. If anything, it's been worse than I imagined. Carbon policies went from being environmental to transportation-based. Things that I didn't think were revenue generating ended up being revenue generating. And there's been a lot of political play over carbon policies, and we're definitely not done. This will only escalate next year.
An event comes to my mind as you ask that question, Ben, and that is, it was either the second or third week of session, and every night the introduction list comes out with the bills that are being introduced in the House and the Senate, and we go through that. We filter out the bills that we need to track. And this was, at this point, the lists were very long still. They introduced a lot of bills the first couple of weeks. And I was feeling, I don't know if depressed is quite, but kind of overwhelmed by all of not only the bills, but the number of really bad bills for agriculture that were being introduced. And a friend of mine texted me about that time and said, "Hey, how you doing?" Just knowing it, session's kind of hard. And I probably should have waited before I texted him back, but it was a pretty remorseful text, like, life sucks, things are really bad. And I had to, when I was all done, I texted him back and said, "Look, it is not that bad. Just you hit me at a wrong time." But I think that's how we felt at the beginning of session. It was like drinking out of a fire hose, just the quantity and the sheer number of just really left-leaning progressive bills in a quantity that we hadn't seen before. You always get a couple every session, but they're becoming more the theme, at least the last couple of years, and that's a real concern, because at some point, some of these are actually going to pass. You can't kill them all, it seems. Although I think we've been pretty successful at maybe not killing them, but making them less bad, which is not a real ringing term of endorsement. But if they're less, harmful, then at this point with these majorities, sadly, that's a win.
So these bills are working their way through the refining process, and unfortunately, a lot of them seem to be making it through. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
They are, and I go back to the one Bree talked about earlier, the farm labor standards. That's not the right. The
Farm labor contractor bill.
Yeah, I mean, what happened on the Senate floor was unbelievable.
Yeah, I was actually surprised by that outcome. It's really one of the best possible scenarios we could have ever hoped for, and we had really surprising allies in this. Jamie Peterson, Senator Mullet. We had some folks that hadn't weighed in on a lot of agriculture bills recently come in and say, guys, this doesn't add up for us. What's happening here? And so kind of out of the woodwork came some surprises, and I'm excited about that. I hope that is a trend that continues in the future.
I think that was a case in point where that bill was so extreme that even Senate Democrats that don't typically vote well on pro-ag bills, they saw it as for what it was, and that was just a very extreme bill that was not fair to any industry, including agriculture.
And had no real facts to back up why it was there to begin with.
Do you guys have any other bills that are on your radar moving into the next few weeks that you wanted to share with our members?
So, a couple, we've been kind of sad and remorseful so far. Maybe I'll give you a couple of good bills that are working their way through. I think we mentioned this last week or the week before that, and that is there's a bill that Representative Chris Corey out of Yakima has worked on with his constituents, 2498, dealing with DNR ag leases. We've had a problem with DNR terminating some leases that farmers and ranchers have had. And sadly, it's to put in solar panels or to transition the land to some other use that has been harmful to farmers. And so this bill, and DNR agrees to it, is a farmer would be financially remunerated for losing that lease earlier than the term of the lease would have allowed. So that's a very positive thing. So we're thankful for that. Senate Bill 6306 is a soil health initiative bill. It started out last year, didn't pass, working on it again with WSU and Department of Ag to help enhance soil health in farms across the state. So those are all positive things that we're thankful. We're getting Democrat support on those as well as Republican support, so that really helps.
We had some fun visitors at the Capitol. You want to talk about that?
We did. We spoke to a Christian school from Brewster. And I love speaking with schools. As a lobbyist, a lot of times I get frustrated with adults because I want them to be engaged in the process. I want them to know what's happening. I want them to know how a bill becomes a law. And really, instead of being frustrated at adults, the thing we have to do is kind of target children in civics education. Let them know how a bill becomes a law. Get them engaged. Never lose that opportunity to speak with classroom kids because that's really where it starts. And that's what we're going to need in 20 years.
One of the things that you shared, you related a bit of that story of when you met with those kids that I thought was so interesting. Well, you weren't, surprised isn't the right word, but you were so impressed maybe with how engaged or maybe their grasp on some of these issues that you were talking about. They had a concept.
They did. And sometimes you'll throw out a question, not really expecting an answer, but you will always be surprised at what kids really know about agriculture and the world around them. They're so much more observant than we give them credit. And I'm just always pleasantly surprised when I speak with them.
One of the things that at Farm Bureau we're really talking about is what does Farm Bureau look like in the next 100 years? This is our centennial year, and it's really important to think about how are we planting that seed? What does farming look like even in the next 20 years? And so it's always great to see kids who care about farming and care about what's happening with the government so that they're being educated so that in 20 years when they take over those farms, they're actually going to understand kind of the entire process.
Well, one of the things that we're working on is incorporating more of our members, getting more membership involvement, be it classroom kids or individuals coming to testify. We also have the upcoming Ag Day next week. I know, Bailey, you've been working very closely with that. You want to give a plug on what we're looking at come Wednesday.
Of course, yes. So we're actually in the process of beginning to stuff 150 commodity bags, which is awesome. And I do have to say thank you to all of the counties that have donated items because we started this project last year as kind of a vision from the Ledge Committee, and it's grown immensely. And the bags are great this year, and I'm super excited to pass them out. But we need Farm Bureau members there. And so if you're interested in coming and celebrating Washington Farm Bureau and just meeting face to face with our senators and representatives, come to the Capitol on February 26th. And we are meeting at the Sundial at 9 a.m. And we're going to have a floor resolution read. And actually, Tom, you actually kind of set this up for us. So can you talk about what that will look like for our Farm Bureau members?
And as I do that, I have to really give a shout out to Senator Jim Honey Ford's office and his incredible legislative assistant, Penny, who just kept pushing and pushing and pushing to get this resolution scheduled on the Senate floor. She doesn't take no for an answer. So because of Penny and Senator Honey Ford, we've got the resolution that will be read. We're thinking right as the Senate floor session starts at about just sometime after 10 o'clock. And so we'll get everybody rounded up and up into the galleries so they can watch the action on the Senate floor. So just a great opportunity to honor the Farm Bureau and our members. Our state officers will be there. Our CEO, John Stuhmiller, will be there. So if you can come, it would be a great day to come to the legislature. And the reason for the 150 bags, Bailey, is what? Why 150?
So there's actually 3 extra bags. So we need 147 bags, but that's kind of a hard number to ask for. So there's 147 senators and reps. And so we're going to actually hand deliver these bags to each of the offices. And Ben, you've spent a lot of time in some of those offices. So can you talk about what's the point of bringing a goodie bag to an LA or a senator or a rep?
Well, one of the key issues is just that consistent repetition of being reminded, ag and farmers and ranchers and dairy members, we're here and we're not going away. We are, like Bailey mentioned last week, if you're wearing clothes, if you are sheltered, if all those things, that's because of an ag.
He said that way more beautifully than I did.
As far as the legislative offices, just having that consistent presence and that consistent reminder that agriculture really matters and the decisions that these legislators are making directly impact agriculture. And by train, it impacts them as well as just a member of our great state. So the way and the decisions that they're making really do matter and have an impact. So I think the resolution not requiring, but enabling these senators in particular to listen to the resolution, to hear the impact that ag members are making on our state is going to have a huge benefit on that day. So we really do want to encourage our members, if you're listening, to come out and consider coming out on next Wednesday, the 26th at 9 o'clock at the Capitol. The WFB Update is a production of the Washington Farm Bureau, the voice of agriculture in Washington State, ensuring our family farms continue to feed the world. To learn more, visit our website at www.wsfb.com.